Beshno az nechon hikayat mikonad, az jodaya shekayat mikonad. Kaz neestan chon mara bobride and, az nafiram mard ozan nalide and. Listen to the song of the reed in its weeping, for it tells the story of our separation. For since the day the reed was torn from its riverbank, in its sorrow is heard the cry of every man, of every woman. Once, in the city of Ray, there lived a wealthy merchant who had a friend who lived in the country. Now every year he would invite his country friend to his splendid home, and there he would offer him the choicest of delicacies on plates of silver. There he would offer him the finest of wines in cups of gold. There he would offer him beds covered in silken sheets. Now every year when the country friend was showered with this generosity, with this hospitality, he would always have that same nervous laugh. "Rustam, my friend," he would say, "every year you shower me with this generosity, and I know within me that I can never repay you for it, and this fills me with such shame." But every time the country friend spoke in this way, at once the merchant would reply to him, saying this: "Rustam, my friend, in anything I offer you, remember this, that I offer you nothing more than my own heart." And so year after year, the country friend visited his friend, the wealthy merchant in the city, until a year came when they were sitting together at the same table, and the country friend said this to him: "Rustam, my friend, every year you invite me to your house. Give me but one opportunity to have the pleasure of inviting you to my home. Come to my home in the country, not far from Masule. Come when the melons and quinces are in season. Come when nature itself covers the wilderness in a cloth of bright brocade. Come, you and your family, and allow me once the pleasure of having you as my guests." But the merchant had only this to reply to his friend: "Rustam, my friend, what you offer is very kind, very generous indeed, but I have so much business in the city. I do not know if I can tear myself away to visit you in the country. Let us speak about this next year." And so the next year came, and once again the country friend made the same invitation. And once again the merchant had his excuses. "Oh, I have too much business in the city. Oh, the country is too far away. Let us talk about it the year after." And year after year, the country friend made his invitation. And year after year, the merchant declined it. And then the merchant's own children approached him, saying this to him: "Pedaram, our dear father, after all, what the country friend says is true. What your country friend says is true. You are always inviting him to our home. Why don't you once give him the pleasure of having us be his guests at his home in the country, not far from Masule?" And to this the merchant replied to his children like this: "My dear children, I know my country friend's words are sincere, but I am afraid I am afraid to accept his invitation. For you see, there is friendship. Friendship like the spring, like the month of Farvadin when everything blossoms and blooms and a new gate is opened on paradise. But there is also friendship, like the sword, like the bracing winter wind that tears apart the field of corn. If I accept my country friend's invitation, what sort of friendship will we have between us after that? This is what worries me. And so, year after that, the country friend insisted, again and again with the same invitation. And his persistence wore down the merchant's resolve until a year came when the merchant finally accepted the invitation of his country friend. And the merchant's family were filled with excitement, for they were going to take a long journey to the country. They would be leaving the city and all its pollution and all its noise and all its troubles. And they thought in the country they would breathe fresh air and they would see all the beauties of the world that the city chased away. And so they went on their journey, thinking of the fresh water, the tasty fruits and seasons that they would eat in the country. They were so filled with anticipation as they took that long journey towards Masule that every day it seemed like the sun itself was a benevolent king, tossing gold coins in their path as they made their journey. They were so filled with excitement that every evening when they traveled, they thought the full moon itself was a radiant queen, and the stars that surrounded her were her beautiful women and her handsome page boys beckoning them on their journey towards the country friend's house, not far from Masule. And after many days' travel, they finally arrived. And already the night was descending over the sky. And there they saw the home of the country friend, surrounded by the fields. And they all walked up. And then when the merchant and his family were standing at the door, they knocked on the door. And when the door opened, there was the country friend standing there. But he was frowning, and his arms were crossed. And he turned to the merchant and he said, "Yes, what can I do for you?" The merchant didn't understand. "Dostum, my friend, don't you see? Don't you see that I am your friend from Ray? I am your friend who you have visited all these past years. Don't you know who I am?" The country friend only looked at him with his arms crossed, and he said, "In this pale light at sunset, you could be anything you say. How can I tell?" And the merchant could not believe what he heard. His mouth dropped. He was silent. And then somehow he was able to utter these words. "I see now, my friend. I see now, my friend, that I have no claim. I have no claim over your gratitude. Let us see whether I have any claim over your humanity. You see, the night is descending over the sky, and I have come with all my family, and I need a shelter for this evening. For the nighttime sky announces that there will be rain, and soon rain clouds will cover the sky." But at these words, the country friend, with his arms still crossed, said this, "Well, You could go to that shack over there. You see in the distance, right on the other side of my field. You could stay there overnight, but leave soon after in the morning, for I have work to do in the field. Oh, and then take this bow and arrow, for if you stay there, one of you must hold watch during the evening, for there has been a wolf that has preyed on my flocks. So if one of you holds watch for that wolf, all of you could stay in that shack. And then he slammed the door in the merchant's face. And the merchant and his family dragged their feet across that field. They arrived in front of that shack. A shack that barely had enough room for one person would be the place where the merchant and his family would stay that evening. So they all went into that shack, one sleeping over the other. Only the merchant himself stayed awake and looked through that simple window that was cut into that shack, holding on to the bow and arrow, holding watch for that wolf that the country friend said preyed over his fields. And when they were all in there, sleeping one on top of the other, and the merchant holding his watch, then it began to rain, and rain, and rain, and rain. It ran so much that the roof began to leak, and everyone who was crowded in that small shack was drenched as they were sleeping. But the merchant all the time was awake, holding on to that bow and arrow. And then finally the rain ended. And when the clouds parted, there was a full moon in the sky that showered silver light all over the field. And then the merchant saw something moving across the field. It was an animal, but in the silver light he could only see the outline of that animal as it was crossing the field. And his heart began to race. It must be the wolf, he thought to himself. And so with his bow and arrow, he took his aim, and he shot his arrow. And the arrow hit its mark and killed the animal, and the animal gave a terrible cry and fell lifeless in the middle of the field. Everything was silent. And then but a few moments later, the merchant saw this man running across the field. Again, he could only see the outline of this man in the silver moonlight. The man was running towards the fallen animal. And then when he was standing right beside, he fell to his knees and he began to weep and crying out again and again, "You fool! You fool! Look what you've done! You fool! Look what you have done!" At first, the merchant didn't understand. He left the shack and he walked towards the fallen animal, only to discover that it was a foal. And beside the foal was his country friend weeping, crying out again and again, "You fool! You fool! Look what you've done! Look what you've done, you fool!" And then the merchant turned to his country friend and he said, "I am very sorry for this. But after all, how could I know? From the distance, only having the moon as my light, how could I know that this animal that crossed your field was not the wolf that you spoke to me of, but was rather one of the foals in your stable?" But the country friend continued to weep, protesting, "You fool, how could you not know? How could you not know that this animal was my beloved foal? My foal who I was grooming for the stables of a Mirza, a prince. How many gold coins I would have gotten from that foal, and now all is lost. How could you not recognize my foal? I was sleeping in my bed, and I recognized the cry of the foal from my bed. How could you not recognize him?" And all this time the merchant was listening to his country friend. And when he finished speaking, this was the merchant's reply. Now I understand. Now I understand. From your bed, you recognize the cry of your beloved foal. But in the pale light of sunset, you did not recognize. You did not recognize the face of your friend who has offered you his home every year, your friend who has offered you his own family every year, whose friend who has had no other thought to offer his affection and all he had to his country friend, your friend who all these years has offered nothing less than his own heart. Him you did not recognize. And as the merchant spoke, the moon had come right above him, and all this silver light was showered all over him. And in that moonlight, when the country friend looked up and wiped his tears, finally he recognized the friend. He recognized the face of his beloved friend from the city of Re. And when he recognized the face of his friend, he was filled with such remorse that he began to weep once again. "Tustam, my friend," he said, "how can you forgive me? How can you forgive me? All those years you invited me to your home and showered me with all that generosity I knew I could never repay filled me with shame, such shame. And it was this shame that robbed me of my gratitude towards you. Tustam, my friend, how can you forgive me? How can you forgive me for my ingratitude?" And at that moment, the merchant understood that all those years he offered his hospitality, his generosity to his country friend. And all those years he had forgotten one important thing. He had forgotten to protect his friend's dignity. And so at that moment, the merchant said these words to his country friend: "Agar guyam, mara mahsur bidar, mara guyad, Torah mahsur haham." When he asked me, please forgive me, I replied, "I want you to be forgiven. I want you to be forgiven." And so at once, the merchant reached for the arms of his weeping friend who was still on his knees, and gently raised his country friend to his feet. And all together, the country friend and the merchant's family walked towards the home of the country friend. And when he opened the door to them, they saw a simple dwelling, and the country friend took out plates of wood and offered him the fruits of his field. The country friend took out a simple clay pitcher, and filled it with water, for that was the only drink he could offer his guests. And as he offered this water and the simple fruits of his field, there was that same nervous laughter that the country friend always had in the presence of the merchant. But this time, for the first time, the merchant heard that nervous laughter of his beloved country friend. And he put his arm around the shoulder of his country friend, saying this, "Dostum, my friend, there is friendship like the spring, like the month of Farvadin, when everything blossoms and blooms and a new gate is open on paradise. But there is also friendship like the sword, like the bracing wind that tears apart the field of corn. But you, Dostum, my beloved friend, may our friendship rather be like a window through which we see each other as we really are, a window through which we see what we really have to offer, one to the other." And after that night, friendship returned to the merchant and his country friend, and the friendship that was between them never left them until the end of their days. Beshno az ne chon hekayat mikonad, az jodaya shekayat mikonad. Listen to the song of the reed in its weeping, for it tells the story of our separation.